In this presentation, we're going to be addressing the topic of decolonising universities. To decolonise means to grant independence to a country. To decolonise university involves identifying colonial systems, structures, and relationships and working to challenge those systems. Universities, as institutions which form paths of learning and thought, have a responsibility to recognise their role in colonisation, as it paved way for many of their successes and opportunities that universities still benefit from today. For example, Uni of Bristol benefited from colonisation as a result of British Empire's involvement in slavery. For example, the Wills family, who were tobacconists, donated in 2019 retail price index values £78 million to the uni. There are many aspects of universities that need to be decolonised, ranging from the curriculum itself to the names of buildings to individual universities identifying what role they played in colonisation and how they benefited from it. I'll be focusing mainly on the concept of retrospective justice and how these principles can help us to see how we can go about decolonising universities. Universities across the Western world particularly need to focus on decolonising, namely UK and US universities who had a huge involvement in colonisation. For example, the role in transatlantic slave trade, such as Brown University, who in a recent report published in 2004 addressed the fact they had enslaved persons working on their campuses. Retrospective justice and acknowledging the past are two key players that universities need to employ in order to decolonise. Retrospective justice involves three particular actions that all do overlap in practice: apology, reparation, and memorialisation. These all must be done for a university to be fully decolonised, as it directly confronts the past and helps construct the future. Harvard and Brown are two universities that have looked at retrospective justice. In order for the apology to be effective, the offence must be acknowledged adequately. It can be hard to get the apology right sometimes because in many cases those who have been affected by colonialism within institutions such as slaves who work within Brown University are no longer living. Eliza Barkin defines reparations as some form of material recompense for that which cannot be returned, such as human life, a flourishing culture, and economy and identity. While an apology can in many ways appear symbolic, reparations are thought of as concrete. One way of paying reparations is to give money to those who are affected by colonisation. However, there is only so much money can do. Money cannot fix the lost identity that many descendants of enslaved people have experienced as a result of colonisation that tore their ancestors from their lives in the Caribbean, for example. Reparations can also be made by making services more accessible to minorities, such as affirmative action and higher education admissions. For example, in 2016, the Supreme Court ruled in the case of Fisher versus University of Texas that race consciousness admissions programs used by the University of Texas were lawful. Finally, memorialisation is how the events of the past can be conveyed to those in the present and future. Memorialisation is not just about remembering and having a deep concern for the past, but it's also about transmitting the meaning of past events to the next generations. In recent years, there have been numerous protests on college campuses regarding the veneration of historical figures who have prominent roles in historical injustice. For example, students at Harvard have protested the use of slaveholder Isaac Roll's family crest on Harvard Law School's seal. Roll is a slave owner, and so celebrating his life is wrong, and is in a sense celebrating the suffering of others. Students of Harvard argue that instead of honouring these people, we should be educating people on what they did and make them realise the mistakes of the past. Memorialisation is a usable heritage through which the university can theoretically begin to redress its wrongs and from which the university can begin a more just future. Now we'll briefly look at one risk of decolonising universities. Civil War historian and president of Harvard, Drew Force, however, cautions against historical amnesia. If you erase the whole past, it is too easy to feel innocent. It's too easy not to learn from it and to think you are not going to make any mistakes in the present. You're better than those mistakes. We're not better than those mistakes. Therefore, in my view, we should not be erasing the past, for example, pulling down statues of slave traders, because then people won't realise the inhumane acts people of the past committed. Rather, we should be modifying the narrative and placing monuments such as statues of slave traders in a less commemorative place and have plaques attached to them to show what the individual had done. For example, in 2017, an anonymous member of the public placed a plaque on Edward Colston's statue in Bristol, stating this commemorates the 12 million enslaved, of whom 6 million died as captives. This can be seen on the screen.
We can begin to understand the importance of decolonising universities by analysing institutions such as the University of Cambridge. Cambridge remained a renowned and prestigious centre of learning during Britain's slaving and empire era. Therefore, as the university's own professor Martin Miller explains, it is not unreasonable to suggest that they benefited directly or indirectly from colonisation and contributed to the practices of the time. However, when conducting my research into this case study, it became apparent how the links between Cambridge and colonisation had rarely been investigated until very recent years. The lack of connections made between the impact of colonisation and the success of the university presents just one way in which colonisation contributes to social inequality and ignorance. By failing to acknowledge the university's past involvement in colonisation and slavery, the university in turn failed to recognise the huge impact colonisation had and still has on both the students and professors belonging to the institution, as well as the content distributed within specific courses. Therefore, Decolonisation is necessary in order to revive the memory of colonisation in a way that allows for that retrospective justice that is discussed by Lindsay Walters, which acknowledges the wrongdoings of the past and honours those affected by it in order to build a fairer future. In the context of the University of Cambridge, this more just future could include an expanded curriculum that ventured further than Eurocentric history, and perhaps even a re-evaluation of whether the content taught in humanities subjects such as history reflect the demographic that now exists within the university, or whether it still revolves around the colonial focus of white Western men. Although decolonisation is not an easy process to begin and continue, in the past few years, the University of Cambridge have finally begun to delve into their colonial past in order to address their involvement. This has been done through the launching of their Legacies of Enslavement project, in which Cambridge have promised to address inequalities through greater self-knowledge and self-reflection. This is an example of how decolonisation is being attempted through research and education. However, although attempts like this are positive, it is important to note that some challenges are still presented, as there is no guarantee that education on the topic of colonisation will translate into institutional decisions that will help to soften the negative impact of colonialism. Thankfully, the University of Cambridge have taken their first steps in integrating decolonisation into everyday life by making small changes. These changes include refusing to celebrate benefactors involved in the slave trade, such as Tobias Rustat, who was a major benefactor for Jesus College. Although this is a minor change, it aids the process of decolonisation by making the university a more inclusive environment that doesn't celebrate colonialism.
So this is a case study on the University of Manchester, and I just wanted to start off by giving a brief history of the institution. The University of Manchester, as we know it today, as a single-site university, was never actually that. It actually became that in 2004, when it became a merge between the UMIS, or the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, and the Victoria University of Manchester. The UMIS was founded in 1824, and the Victoria University was founded in 1851. And although both universities were met with slow and unsuccessful beginnings, they later had centuries of academic success and became staples in Mancunian society. So how is the university linked to colonialism? Well, first of all, Manchester has such an expansive history of racial slavery, and it's arguably one of the first major industrial cities in the world. So it's unavoidable that its institutions were funded by predecessors that were highly involved in the trade. For example, it had such a booming cotton industry, and this was from slave-grown cotton in the West Indies. Benjamin Haywood, who was the first chairman of the UMIS, he invested in hundreds of voyages. William Gladstone, who was a former Prime Minister, he was elected 4 times. His family was heavily involved in slave trade, and he purchased land for Owens College in the Victoria Institute. Although these are only 2 examples, the list is actually very extensive based on university research, and arguably it could be said that the university is built on slave labour, and this suffering has taken place to make way for education and culture. But it leads us to the question, can we decolonise this university without forgetting the past? The university, after long detailed research, has taken a few measures to attempt to begin its decolonisation process, and these measures link to the ideas of retrospective justice, which were previously mentioned by Emma. They released a Race Matters report in October 2020, which shows numbers of racial minorities either studying at the university or employed as staff. They show data of degrees which are awarded by race and show whether there is a gap between races, and conclusively there is a gap between white and black students, and the university has promised to address this issue. They are taking measures such as memorialization. They want to celebrate black history in the university. They want to offer scholarships to local young talented black people. They also want to begin to have a more inclusive curriculum. They want to hear and learn from other non-Westernized voices. They want increased content around black and ethnic minorities. From a staff point of view, which can be counted as reparations, they want to increase They want to reduce the ethnic pay gap and reduce the unconscious bias when staff is being hired. But all of these measures lead us to question whether money is truly enough. Like Emma said, can this all be interpreted as sweeping things under the rug to kind of forget the past and forget the suffering that allowed this university to flourish?